Hello everyone, my name is Colonel Sarah Miller. I'm a 52 years old and I served in the United States Army for more than 3 decades. Throughout my career, I survived combat zones, commanded soldiers under enemy fire, and learned that courage isn't measured by how loudly you fight. It's measured by how fiercely you protect the people you love. I always believed the battlefield was the most dangerous place I would ever face. I was wrong. The hardest battle of my life didn't happen overseas. It happened in my own family. It began with one desperate phone call from my daughter, a call that nearly came too late. What happened next destroyed one of the wealthiest families in North Carolina, exposed a massive federal conspiracy, and proved that no amount of money or political influence can outrun the truth forever. This is my story. The evening everything changed began like countless others during my military career. I had just finished another long day at Fort Liberty in North Carolina. The sun was disappearing beyond the horizon, painting the sky with shades of orange and crimson. Soldiers were leaving the base, heading home to their families, while I remained inside my office reviewing reports from the week's operations. My office was quiet, almost too quiet. Normally, my daughter Chloe would call around that time. Even after getting married 2 years earlier, she still phoned me several times each week. Sometimes we talked about nothing important. Sometimes she asked for recipes she could never remember. Sometimes she simply wanted to hear my voice. That evening, the phone never rang. At first, I wasn't worried. People get busy, life happens. But as the minutes slowly passed, an uneasy feeling settled inside my chest. After 34 years in uniform, I had learned to trust instincts that couldn't be explained. More than once those instincts had saved soldiers' lives. That same instinct now whispered one terrifying sentence. Something is wrong with Chloe. As I packed my files into my briefcase and walked toward the parking lot. Just as I reached my car, my secure military phone vibrated. The caller ID didn't display Chloe's name. Instead, it showed the unknown number. I answered immediately. Colonel Miller. For several seconds, nothing. Only heavy breathing. Then I heard my daughter's voice, soft-broken, terrified.
Mom.
She sounded as though she was trying not to cry. My heart instantly dropped.
Chloe, what's happening?
I don't have much time. Her words were barely louder than a whisper. I hid this phone. Please don't hang up. Then I heard another sound. A loud slam. Footsteps. Someone shouting in the distance. Chloe gasped. They're coming. Before I could ask another question, the line suddenly disconnected. I stood frozen beside my car. Every instinct I possessed exploded into action. I called back immediately. No answer. Again, nothing. Again, the phone was already turned off. Within seconds I contacted military communications, asking them to trace the emergency call. The answer came almost immediately. The signal originated from the Sterling family estate outside Charlotte. Richard Sterling, my son-in-law, a billionaire businessman with connections stretching from Wall Street to the governor's office, a man everyone admired. A man I had never fully trusted. From the very beginning, something about Richard felt rehearsed. Too charming, too polished, too perfect. Every smile looked practiced. Every compliment sounded calculated. Whenever Chloe spoke, Richard answered for her. Whenever she wanted to visit me alone, he somehow found an excuse to accompany her. Whenever I asked if she was happy, she always smiled. But her eyes never did. Looking back now, the warning signs had always been there. I simply wanted to believe my daughter had found happiness after years of growing up with a mother who spent more birthdays deployed overseas than sitting at the dinner table. That guilt blinded me, and monsters love blind parents. I climbed into my government-issued SUV and drove toward Charlotte faster than I had ever driven in my life. Traffic lights blurred together. The speedometer climbed higher and higher. Nothing mattered except reaching my daughter. As I drove, memories flooded my mind. I remembered the day Chloe learned to ride her bicycle. She refused training wheels because she wanted to be brave like Mom. She crashed into the mailbox within 30 seconds. She stood up with bloody knees, smiled through her tears, and demanded another try. That was Chloe. She never quit. I remembered her high school graduation. She spotted me in the audience wearing my dress uniform. Instead of walking calmly across the stage like everyone else, she ran. She threw her arms around me in front of hundreds of people. I knew you'd make it home, she whispered. Those memories kept replaying as I drove through the darkening evening. Then another memory surfaced. The day Chloe introduced Richard. He arrived in a custom, tailored suit worth more than some soldiers earned in a month. He brought expensive flowers, an expensive bottle of wine, an expensive watch as a gift for me. I refused the watch. Military officers don't accept gifts like that. Richard laughed politely. I admire your principles, Colonel. But something inside his smile said something entirely different. He wasn't respecting my integrity. He was testing whether it could be bought. When he realized it couldn't, he never offered another gift. Over the following months, I watched him carefully. He always knew exactly what powerful people wanted to hear. Business leaders praised him. Politicians celebrated him. Television reporters described him as one of North Carolina's brightest young entrepreneurs. Only once did I see the mask slip. A waiter accidentally spilled water onto Richard's jacket during our engagement dinner. For only 2 seconds, his face transformed, his eyes became cold, his jaw tightened, his voice dropped into something almost frightening. "You incompetent idiot." The waiter apologized repeatedly. Richard smiled again almost instantly after noticing everyone watching. He even tipped the young man generously before leaving. Everyone praised his generosity. Only I noticed the terror on the waiter's face afterward. Soldiers learn to recognize danger. Predators often reveal themselves in moments they believe nobody is watching. I warned Chloe, not directly. I simply asked, "Are you absolutely certain?" She laughed. "Oh, Mom, you're always investigating people." Maybe I was. But mothers don't stop protecting their children just because those children become adults. Still, I attended the wedding. I smiled for photographs. I saluted Richard during the reception as a joke everyone appreciated. Deep inside, I prayed I was wrong. For almost 2 years, everything appeared normal. Chloe posted smiling photographs online. Luxury vacations, elegant charity galas, designer dresses, magazine interviews, the perfect marriage, the perfect family, the perfect life. But perfection is often the best disguise evil can wear. 43 minutes after Chloe's emergency call, I turned into the long private road leading toward the Sterling estate. The mansion looked exactly like every magazine photograph. Massive stone walls, luxury vehicles lined across the circular driveway. It resembled a palace more than a family home. Yet something immediately felt wrong. The entire property seemed strangely silent. No music, no laughter, no security guards outside, only darkness. I parked several hundred feet away instead of using the main entrance. Old military habits die hard. If danger truly existed, I wanted to observe before announcing my arrival. As I stepped out of the vehicle, I noticed faint lights behind a smaller building across the property. The guest house. I remembered Chloe mentioning it months earlier. Richard supposedly used it as a private office. Suddenly, I heard something. A muffled scream. It lasted only a second. Then complete silence. Every muscle in my body tightened. Without another thought, I began moving toward the guest house. I had no idea that within the next hour, everything the Sterling family had spent decades building would begin collapsing around them. And once I opened that door, there would be no turning back. The closer I moved toward the guest house, the more certain I became that Chloe's phone call hadn't been the result of panic. It had been a desperate cry for help. The night air was unusually still. Expensive landscape lights illuminated perfectly trimmed hedges, marble statues, and flower gardens that looked as though they belonged on the grounds of a royal palace. Everything appeared beautiful. Everything felt wrong. I stayed close to the shadows, moving quietly between rows of tall oak trees. Years of military training had taught me how to approach dangerous situations without attracting attention. About 30 yards away from the guest house, I stopped. A luxury SUV was parked beside the building. Richard's. Another black sedan belonged to his older brother Carter. I also recognized Beatrice Sterling's silver Rolls-Royce. The entire family was there. Then I heard voices. At first they were too faint to understand. I moved closer. The windows of the guest house were covered with heavy curtains, but one curtain hadn't been completely closed. A narrow gap allowed me to see inside. My heart nearly stopped. Chloe was lying on the hardwood floor. Her hands were tied behind her back with plastic zip ties. One side of her face was already swollen, and strands of her blonde hair covered her tear-stained cheeks. Richard stood over her like a man who had completely forgotten what humanity looked like. His expensive jacket had been removed. The sleeves of his white dress shirt were rolled above his elbows. He wasn't smiling anymore. The charming billionaire from magazine covers had disappeared. Standing in his place was a violent stranger. "You had one job," Richard shouted. "Smile. Attend the gala. Keep your mouth shut." Chloe slowly tried to sit up. "I won't help you steal from veterans." Richard kicked a nearby chair across the room. The wooden chair crashed against the fireplace. "You don't even understand what you found." "I understand enough." Her voice trembled. I copied everything. For the first time, fear appeared in Richard's eyes. "What did you say?" "I made copies." His face turned pale. Before he could respond, Beatrice stepped forward. Unlike Richard, she never raised her voice. She didn't need to. People like Beatrice understood that calm words could often cause far greater damage than screaming. She crouched beside Chloe. "My dear," she said softly, "you've always been emotional." She gently brushed Chloe's hair away from her bruised face. To anyone watching from outside, it almost looked motherly. Then her expression changed. If those files leave this family, you won't, she stood gracefully. Richard, he looked toward his mother. Teach your wife what loyalty means. My entire body tensed. Every instinct screamed at me to kick open the door immediately. But another part of me, the officer who had led soldiers through dangerous operations, knew rushing in without understanding the situation could make everything worse. I forced myself to stay hidden. I needed evidence. I needed witnesses. I needed them to expose themselves completely. Richard grabbed Chloe by the arm and dragged her across the floor. She cried out in pain. Where are the files? I'll never tell you. His hand struck her face. The sound echoed through the room. My hands clenched into fists so tightly my fingernails dug into my palms. I had seen violence before. I had seen war. But watching someone hurt your own child. There is no military training for that. There are no copies, Richard shouted. There has to be. I already sent them somewhere safe. Richard froze. So who has them? Chloe looked directly into his eyes. My mother. It wasn't true. At least, not yet. But the lie accomplished exactly what Chloe intended. For the first time that evening, Richard looked genuinely afraid. Beatrice slowly smiled. Then we'll solve two problems instead of one. She turned toward Carter. When Colonel Miller arrives, make sure she never leaves with her daughter. A chill ran down my spine. This wasn't simply domestic abuse anymore. They were discussing kidnapping, possibly murder. My phone vibrated silently inside my jacket. Detective Nora Wells. I had texted her while driving. Only 4 words. Said need immediate assistance. I quietly answered. I'm outside. How bad is it? She whispered. I looked through the window again. Richard had lifted Chloe from the floor and shoved her into a small bedroom. He slammed the heavy wooden door. Then I heard a lock click. They've imprisoned her. There was silence on the other end. Finally Detective Wells spoke. I'm 10 minutes away. You may not have 10 minutes. She hesitated only briefly. Do what you have to do. The line disconnected. Inside the guest house, Carter suddenly walked toward the front window. I stepped backward into darkness just before he pulled the curtain aside. He looked outside for several long seconds. Then he shrugged. I don't see anyone. Richard poured himself a drink. His hands were shaking. What if she really copied the files? Beatrice calmly picked up her phone. Then Dr. Evans will certify an emergency psychiatric evaluation. Richard frowned. You think that'll work? It always works. She smiled without emotion. A wealthy husband trying to help his mentally unstable wife. The newspapers will adore that story. And once she's admitted to Oak Ridge Institute, no one will ever believe another word she says. Carter laughed. They'll medicate her into silence. The 3 of them actually laughed together. As though discussing tomorrow's dinner plans. As though destroying another human being required no more effort than signing paperwork. I realized something terrifying. This wasn't the first time. They had done this before. Maybe not to Chloe, but certainly to someone. Families don't become this comfortable with cruelty overnight. Suddenly, a loud crash came from the locked bedroom. Richard stormed toward the door. You think breaking furniture changes anything? No answer. He unlocked the door. The moment it opened, Chloe ran. She pushed past Richard with every ounce of strength she had left. For one incredible second, she was free. She sprinted toward the front entrance. Toward me. Toward Hope. Richard caught her before she reached the door. He grabbed a fistful of her hair and violently threw her against the hallway wall. Her body slammed into the hardwood. I heard her cry out. That was enough. I didn't wait for the police. I didn't wait for backup. I crossed the yard in seconds. 3 powerful strides carried me onto the front porch. With one kick, the heavy wooden door exploded inward. The sound echoed throughout the guest house. Everyone inside froze. Richard slowly turned around. For a brief moment, he looked confused, then recognition spread across his face. Colonel Miller. He forced a smile. I was just about to call you. I stepped inside without answering. My eyes never left Chloe. She was trying to sit up against the wall. Blood trickled from the corner of her mouth. Finger-shaped bruises wrapped around both arms. When our eyes met, she burst into tears. That single word shattered every remaining piece of restraint inside me. I walked directly toward her. Richard stepped into my path. You need to calm down, I said. Move. His smile disappeared. You're standing inside my property. I looked him directly in the eyes. No, I answered quietly. I'm standing between a predator and my daughter. For the first time since I entered the house, nobody spoke. The silence was suffocating. Outside, I could already hear distant police sirens growing closer. And judging by the panic spreading across Beatrice Sterling's face, she heard them too. The sound of approaching police sirens echoed across the Sterling estate. For the first time that evening, the confidence on Richard Sterling's face began to crack. Beatrice looked toward the front windows. No one called the police. I answered before anyone else could speak. I did. Richard laughed nervously. You honestly believe a few local officers are going to walk into my family's home? He slowly adjusted his expensive watch, as if nothing serious had happened. My attorneys will have them leaving before they finish introducing themselves. I ignored him. Instead, I knelt beside Chloe. Her entire body trembled as I carefully untied the plastic zip ties around her wrists. Deep red marks covered her skin. Some bruises were already turning dark purple. Others looked fresh. She winced as I gently touched her arm. I'm sorry, she whispered. I looked into her tear-filled eyes. For what? For dragging you into this. I brushed a strand of hair away from her swollen face. You never have to apologize for asking your mother to protect you. She leaned against me and quietly cried. For a few precious seconds, the room disappeared. There were no billionaires, no corrupt family, no conspiracy, only a frightened daughter finally finding safety. Then Beatrice interrupted. This touching family reunion is over. Her voice was cold. Richard, call security. Richard smiled again. They'll remove both of them. I slowly stood. There won't be enough security guards. A Carter laughed. You think you're intimidating us because you wear a military uniform. He looked directly at the medals across my chest. This isn't Afghanistan, Colonel. You're just another mother standing inside someone else's house. I calmly removed my phone from my pocket. I wasn't calling local security. Richard frowned. What? I pressed one button. The voicemail Chloe had secretly recorded earlier began playing through the speaker. The room instantly filled with her terrified voice. Mom, please pick up. Everyone froze. Then Richard's own voice thundered from the recording. You think you're leaving me? A loud crash followed. Chloe screamed. Richard, stop. Another sickening sound echoed through the phone. Then Beatrice's unmistakable voice entered the recording. Take her phone. Lock the guest house. If she tells anyone, we'll have Dr. Evans declare her mentally unstable before morning. The recording ended. Silence, absolute silence. Richard stared at my phone as though it were a loaded weapon. His face lost every trace of color. Beatrice was the first to recover. That recording is illegal. It won't survive in court. I almost smiled. North Carolina is a one-party consent state. My daughter recorded her own assault. Richard suddenly lunged toward me. Give me that phone. Before he could reach me, I stepped sideways. Years of military defensive training made the movement almost effortless. Richard stumbled forward, completely losing his balance. He slammed shoulder first into the dining room table. Crystal glasses crashed onto the floor. Carter rushed toward me. I'll take it. He never reached me either. I grabbed his wrist, twisted. His knees buckled instantly. A loud cry escaped his mouth as I forced him to the floor. I strongly recommend, I said calmly, that neither of you touch me again. The front door suddenly burst open. Police, several officers rushed inside with weapons drawn. Nobody move! Richard immediately pointed toward me. Officer, arrest her. She assaulted us. One of the officers looked around the room. He saw Chloe's injuries, the broken zip ties, the overturned furniture, the blood on the hallway floor. He slowly lowered his weapon. Who called 911? I did, I answered. Detective Nora Wells entered moments later. Unlike the uniformed officers, she wasn't interested in Richard's expensive suit or Beatrice's famous last name. She walked directly toward Chloe. Mom, can you tell me who hurt you? Chloe hesitated, her eyes shifted toward Richard. Even now, even after everything, she was afraid. Richard noticed. He smiled. Sweetheart, tell the detective you slipped. Detective Wells immediately stepped between them. You don't get to speak. Richard's smile disappeared. My lawyers will. You can call them after booking. Beatrice stepped forward. This is outrageous. You clearly don't understand who we are. Detective Wells looked directly at her. And no, I understand exactly who you are. She nodded toward Chloe. And I'm looking at what you've done. One officer carefully photographed every injury. Another collected the broken restraints. A third documented the damaged room. The evidence was overwhelming. Still, Richard refused to panic. He leaned close to Detective Wells. My family contributes millions to this state. The governor knows my mother personally. This misunderstanding ends tonight. Detective Wells didn't answer. Instead, she placed a pair of handcuffs on the table. The metallic sound echoed through the room. For the first time, Richard looked uncertain. His confidence slowly began to disappear. Then another vehicle pulled into the driveway. Not police. 3 black luxury sedans. Richard smiled again. My attorneys. Within moments, 3 sharply dressed lawyers entered the guest house carrying leather briefcases. Behind them came a television news crew. Apparently, the Sterling family intended to control the story before anyone else could. The lead attorney extended his hand toward Detective Wells. I'm Michael Vance. I represent the Sterling family. My clients have been falsely accused. He glanced toward Chloe. My understanding is your victim has experienced emotional instability before. That's a lie, I answered. He ignored me. My clients were attempting to arrange psychiatric care when Colonel Miller violently entered private property. The television camera immediately turned toward me, exactly as planned. Richard folded his arms. The confidence had returned. Money, power, influence. Those had always been the Sterling family's greatest weapons. Beatrice looked directly into my eyes. Do you finally understand, Colonel? You cannot defeat people like us. I remained perfectly calm, because unlike the Sterling family, I hadn't brought my strongest weapon yet. The sound of heavy military boots echoed from outside. One pair, then another, then several more. Every head inside the guest house slowly turned toward the front door. Richard frowned. Who is that? I quietly answered. My backup. The room fell silent as the first uniformed officer stepped through the doorway. Behind her came two military police officers, then a federal cybercrime investigator. Finally, a woman in a dark navy suit carrying a thick sealed evidence folder. She walked directly toward me. Colonel Miller. I nodded respectfully. Thank you for coming, Special Agent Monroe. The moment Richard heard that name, his face turned completely white, because this wasn't simply a domestic violence investigation anymore. The war had just become federal, and the Sterling family had absolutely no idea that the evidence about to destroy them had been building for more than 6 months. Special Agent Claire Monroe didn't waste a single second. She stepped into the center of the guest house and calmly placed the thick evidence folder on the dining table. The room fell completely silent. Even the television reporter lowered his microphone. Everyone could sense that whatever was inside that folder was about to change everything. Richard forced a nervous laugh. This is unbelievable. He pointed toward Chloe. She's trying to destroy my family because she wants money. Special Agent Monroe slowly opened the folder. No. She removed several photographs. Your wife has been helping the Department of Defense investigate your company for over 6 months. Richard stared at her. His smile disappeared. What? Beatrice immediately interrupted. That's impossible. My daughter-in-law doesn't know anything about defense contracts. Monroe calmly slid several financial documents across the table. She knew enough to discover over $47 million missing from military rehabilitation funds. The room became perfectly still. Detective Wells looked down at the documents. So this isn't just domestic violence. Monroe shook her head. No, it never was. She looked directly at Richard. Sterling Defense Logistics received federal contracts to build rehabilitation centers for wounded American veterans. She turned another page. The money never reached those projects. Richard swallowed hard. Our accountants handle that. Interesting. Monroe produced another document. Because these offshore transfers were personally approved using your executive authorization code. Richard immediately looked toward his attorney. Say something. Attorney Michael Vance adjusted his glasses. My client denies these accusations. Monroe wasn't finished. She pulled out photographs of abandoned construction sites, broken buildings, empty medical facilities, veterans who had been promised treatment centers but received nothing. Every image struck like a hammer. You stole from wounded soldiers. Her words echoed through the guest house. No one spoke. No one could. I watched Richard carefully. His breathing became faster. Sweat formed across his forehead. For the first time in his life, money couldn't buy an answer. Then Chloe slowly stood beside me. She was bruised, exhausted, barely able to remain on her feet. Yet somehow, she had never looked stronger. I found the fake charities first. Everyone turned toward her. Richard looked as though he had seen a ghost. You searched my office. Chloe nodded. I wasn't searching. I was organizing donations for the annual Veterans Gala. She looked at Detective Wells. I noticed invoices for hospitals that didn't exist. She reached into her handbag. I started making copies. As she removed a small silver necklace, the same inexpensive locket I had given her when she was 10 years old at a county fair. Richard laughed. You're joking? That cheap thing? Chloe slowly opened the tiny locket. Hidden inside was a miniature encrypted USB drive. Every person in the room leaned forward. The thing, the financial records, the offshore accounts, the fake charities, the shell companies, the payments, the emails. Richard's entire body froze. His face became completely pale. You carried that around. Chloe looked directly into his eyes. Every single day. You mocked this necklace. You called it embarrassing. You told me to wear expensive jewelry instead. She smiled sadly. You never realized your entire empire was hidden inside the one thing you refused to notice. Special Agent Monroe accepted the tiny drive. Our cybercrime division already verified the contents. She looked toward Detective Wells. The evidence is authentic. Richard suddenly exploded. You lying little. He rushed toward Chloe. He never reached her. One of the military police officers intercepted him instantly. Richard's face slammed against the wall. His arms were pinned behind his back. Do not move! Richard screamed in pain. This is illegal. I'm innocent. Monroe calmly continued speaking. The evidence also includes audio recordings, internal emails, contract approvals, wire transfers, and executive meeting minutes. She closed the folder. The federal investigation is complete. Detective Wells slowly looked toward Richard. I don't think you're going home tonight. Carter suddenly stepped backward. I didn't know. I swear, I wasn't involved. Monroe opened another file. You personally authorized 23 fraudulent payments. Carter's knees almost gave out. Beatrice finally lost her composure. This is ridiculous. Everything we did was for the company. For our family. General silence filled the room. Then Chloe quietly asked one question. How many veterans went without treatment? Because you wanted another mansion. Beatrice couldn't answer. She looked away. The television camera captured everything. Every expression, every lie, every moment. The entire Sterling family's carefully manufactured reputation was collapsing live on camera. Outside, more federal vehicles arrived. News helicopters circled overhead. Police officers began securing the estate. Detective Wells received another phone call. She listened quietly before hanging up. There are federal search warrants for every Sterling property. Richard looked toward his attorney again. You promised this couldn't happen. Attorney Vance remained silent. He knew the case was already lost. Monroe stepped closer to Richard. I have one question. He looked up. Where is General Nathaniel Sterling? Richard blinked. Has sick. He has dementia. Monroe exchanged a glance with me. Then she smiled slightly. No, he doesn't. Everyone in the room stared at her. Richard frowned. What are you talking about? The general has been cooperating with federal investigators for months. Beatrice's face instantly lost all color. No. Monroe nodded. Less. He confirmed every financial irregularity. He also confirmed that your family attempted to isolate him after he questioned missing contract funds. Richard slowly shook his head. You're lying. No. A calm elderly voice suddenly came from the front doorway. I'm standing right here. Every person in the guest house turned at once. Standing at the entrance, leaning on a polished wooden cane, was General Nathaniel Sterling himself. He looked older than the last time I had seen him. But his eyes remained sharp, clear, determined. Richard whispered almost inaudibly, Grandfather. General Sterling slowly walked into the room. He ignored Richard completely. Instead, he stopped directly in front of Chloe. For several long seconds, neither of them spoke. Then the old general gently reached out and took Chloe's bruised hands into his own. Tears filled his eyes. I'm sorry. His voice cracked with emotion. I should have protected you sooner. Chloe's own eyes filled with tears. You believed me. I always believed you. General Sterling nodded. I simply needed enough proof to destroy them completely. He slowly turned toward Richard, toward Carter, and finally toward Beatrice. His expression hardened. The Sterling name was built serving this country. You turned it into a criminal enterprise. He pointed toward Richard. You abused your wife. He pointed toward Carter. You helped steal from wounded soldiers. Finally, he looked directly at Beatrice. And you taught your sons that power mattered more than honor. No one dared interrupt him, because everyone in that room knew. The final chapter of the Sterling Empire had just begun. General Nathaniel Sterling's words hung in the air like thunder after a lightning strike. No one moved. No one spoke. The entire Sterling Empire, built over generations, was collapsing before everyone's eyes. Richard stared at his grandfather as though he no longer recognized the man who had raised him. You're choosing her over your own family. The old general sighed heavily. My family. He slowly shook his head. My family fought wars to protect this country. He pointed his cane toward Richard. You robbed wounded American soldiers. Then he looked at Beatrice. You ordered an innocent woman locked inside a guest house. Finally, he looked at Carter. And you helped cover it up. His voice became even colder. You stopped being my family the moment you chose greed over honor. No one had an answer. For years they had hidden behind wealth, political influence, corporate lawyers, luxury homes, private jets. They believed those things made them untouchable. Now, none of them mattered. Special Agent Monroe stepped beside the general. Your Honor. She handed another folder to Detective Wells. We have completed the financial audit. Detective Wells opened it carefully. Page after page revealed offshore bank accounts, fraudulent charities, fake rehabilitation programs, shell corporations, money laundering, wire fraud, tax evasion, federal contract theft. The list seemed endless. Even attorney Michael Vance quietly removed his glasses. He knew there was no defense left. Richard looked desperately toward him. Say something. Vance remained silent. There isn't anything left to say. Richard's confidence completely disappeared. He turned toward his mother. Mom? You said we'd always be protected. Beatrice refused to look at him. For the first time in decades, she had no plan, no manipulation, no influence, only fear. Outside the mansion, dozens of federal agents continued searching every building on the estate. The boxes of financial records were carried outside. Computer servers were seized. Luxury vehicles were photographed. Employees quietly watched from a distance as investigators entered offices that had once been considered untouchable. Television helicopters circled overhead. National news channels interrupted their evening broadcasts. The story spread across the country within hours. A billionaire defense family under federal investigation. Military fraud, domestic violence, and corruption allegations shake North Carolina. Everything they had spent decades building was disappearing in a single night. Richard suddenly looked toward Chloe. His voice became softer, almost desperate. We can fix this. I'll confess. I'll repay the money. We can start over. Chloe calmly looked into his eyes. For years, she had hoped those words might someday be sincere. Tonight, she knew they weren't. She slowly shook her head. You don't miss me. You miss control. Richard lowered his head. He knew she was right. Detective Wells stepped forward holding a pair of federal arrest warrants. Richard Sterling. You are under arrest for aggravated assault, unlawful imprisonment, conspiracy, obstruction of justice, wire fraud, and multiple federal financial crimes. She nodded toward another officer. Carter Sterling. You are under arrest on federal conspiracy charges. Two officers secured Carter without resistance. He looked completely defeated. Finally, Detective Wells faced Beatrice, the woman who had spent years controlling politicians, judges, executives, and social elites. Beatrice Sterling. She paused. You are under arrest for conspiracy, witness intimidation, obstruction of justice, financial fraud, and aiding aggravated assault. For just 1 second, the powerful matriarch stood perfectly still. Then she laughed. It wasn't the confident laugh everyone knew. It sounded broken, almost empty. As officers placed handcuffs around her wrists, she slowly turned toward Chloe. Hatred burned in her eyes. You ruined everything. Chloe stepped forward. She wasn't angry anymore. She wasn't afraid anymore. She simply spoke the truth. No. You ruined everything. You taught your sons that money mattered more than kindness. You taught them power was more important than people. You built this prison, and eventually, you trapped yourselves inside it. Beatrice had no reply. The officers quietly escorted the Sterling family outside. Television cameras flashed nonstop. Reporters shouted questions. The billionaire family that once walked proudly across red carpets now entered police vehicles wearing handcuffs. Justice had finally arrived. 8 months later, autumn painted North Carolina in brilliant shades of gold and crimson. The Sterling estate looked completely different. The old guest house, the place where Chloe had been imprisoned, no longer existed. She had ordered it demolished completely. Nothing remained except fresh green grass. In its place stood a beautiful modern building filled with sunlight. The S. Miller, Sterling Recovery and Advocacy Center. Its mission was simple: to provide emergency housing, legal assistance, counseling, financial guidance, and hope for abused military spouses, veterans, and families escaping domestic violence. No survivor would ever feel alone there. On opening day, hundreds of people attended: veterans, military families, police officers, federal investigators, community volunteers. General Nathaniel Sterling arrived in a wheelchair. His health had declined, but his smile had never looked brighter. When Chloe handed him the ceremonial scissors, tears rolled down his cheeks. You saved my family's honor, he whispered. No, Chloe answered. We saved it together. I stood beside my daughter wearing my army dress uniform. For the first time in years, she looked truly free. The bruises had healed. The fear had disappeared. Only quiet confidence remained. As the ribbon fell to the ground, everyone applauded. Survivors walked through the front doors. Children laughed in the courtyard. Veterans shook hands with counselors. Life had returned to the very place where evil once believed it would win. Later that evening, Chloe and I walked through the memorial garden behind the center. The setting sun cast long golden shadows across the flowers. She gently touched the small silver locket still hanging around her neck. I almost threw this away. She smiled. I thought it looked too cheap. I laughed softly. It turned out to be the most valuable piece of jewelry in North Carolina. She laughed too. A real laugh, one I hadn't heard in years. Then she became quiet. You know, I used to think asking for help meant I was weak. I stopped walking and looked at her. No, I gently squeezed her hand. It takes far more courage to ask for help than to suffer in silence. She nodded slowly. I finally understand that. As we looked at the advocacy center standing proudly against the evening sky, I realized something important. Justice doesn't erase pain, it doesn't erase scars, but it gives survivors something even more powerful, a future. Before leaving, I looked one final time at the bronze plaque standing outside the building. The words reflected the setting sun. As no oni esto pabarfo be hailed acontb elder. I smiled quietly, because those words weren't just a promise to survivors. They were a warning to every person who believed money could silence the truth. And if there is one lesson, my daughter, and I learned through all of this, it is that evil may hide behind wealth, behind influence, behind beautiful homes and expensive suits, but sooner or later, truth always finds the front door, and when it does, justice never knocks, it walks straight in. Looking back on everything that happened, I sometimes ask myself one simple question. What would have happened if Chloe had never made that phone call? The answer is heartbreaking. She would have disappeared behind the locked doors of a private psychiatric institution, labeled as unstable, while the people who abused her continued living as respected members of society. The truth would have been buried. Millions of dollars stolen from wounded veterans would never have been recovered. A powerful family would have continued believing they were above the law, and my daughter might never have seen freedom again. But courage changed everything. One desperate phone call, one hidden recording, one inexpensive silver locket, and one decision to refuse silence completely changed the course of countless lives. Richard Sterling believed money could buy loyalty. Beatrice Sterling believed power could erase the truth. Carter believed following the wrong people would protect him. They were all wrong. In the end, it wasn't wealth that decided the outcome. It wasn't political influence. It wasn't famous lawyers or expensive public relations campaigns. It was honesty. It was evidence. It was courage. And above all, it was the determination of one survivor who refused to surrender. Today, the Sterling Empire no longer represents greed and corruption. Instead, the property where fear once lived has become a place of healing. Families escaping abuse now find shelter there. Veterans receive the support they deserve. Children grow up seeing hope instead of violence. The very place that was once built on lies now stands as proof that justice is possible. As for me, I retired from the United States Army, knowing that the greatest mission of my life wasn't fought on a battlefield overseas. It was fought beside my daughter, and I would fight that battle 1,000 times over if it meant protecting her. Chloe often tells me she survived because she made one phone call. I always smile and remind her of the truth. She survived because she refused to give up. Story summary. This story follows Connell Sarah Miller, a decorated U.S. Army officer who rushes to save her daughter, Chloe, after receiving a desperate phone call. She discovers that Chloe has been abused and imprisoned by her billionaire husband, Richard Sterling, and his powerful family after uncovering a massive scheme involving stolen Department of Defense funds meant for wounded veterans. With the help of law enforcement, federal investigators, and General Nathaniel Sterling, the family's own patriarch, the truth is exposed. The Sterling family's fortune and influence collapse, justice is served, and Chloe transforms the place where she once suffered into a recovery and advocacy center for survivors of domestic abuse and military families. The story proves that even the most powerful people can be held accountable when brave individuals choose truth over fear. 2 is lesson from the story. This story teaches us that abuse often hides behind wealth, reputation, and influence. No matter how powerful an abuser may seem, the truth has a way of coming to light when brave people refuse to remain silent. Real strength isn't pretending everything is fine. Real strength is asking for help. Justice may not arrive immediately, but courage, honesty, and perseverance can overcome even the most powerful enemies. Most importantly, never underestimate the love of a parent willing to protect their child. Because when love stands beside truth, fear has nowhere left to hide. Thank you so much for spending your time with me and listening to this story. If this story touched your heart, inspired you, or reminded you that justice is always worth fighting for, please let me know in the comments below. I'd truly love to hear your thoughts and what you would have done in a similar situation. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and then turn on the notification bell so you never miss another emotional story. Thank you again for watching. Until next time, stay safe, stay kind, and always remember, as no matter how powerful evil may seem, the truth will always find its way into the light.